Hello, everyone. My name is Nicolas Aguila. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Pitten-Herdecke, and I'm also a board member and coordinator of YSI. Welcome to the panel, The Challenge of Publishing as a Young Scholar, a conversation with journal editors. As some of you already know, we wrote a report that we presented on Thursday based on a series of interviews we made to early career researchers. And there were several issues that appear in those interviews, and you're welcome to take a look at the report, which is posted online. But two of them stood out. One of them was the challenge of teaching, and the other was the challenge of publishing. And because of that, we did 2 days, 2 full days of the discussion around those two topics. On the topic of teaching, we hosted several panels yesterday, many of which you will be able to see posted on YouTube later on. And today is devoted to the topic of publishing and writing. We just had a very nice session on writing for non-academic audiences. And now the goal of this panel is specifically to discuss some of the common challenges that early career researchers face regarding the publishing process. And for that, we have some of the best panelists that we could have hoped for. So let me introduce them. First, Thomas Ferguson is the research director at the Institute for New Economic Thinking, and he's professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Orsola Costantini is an economic affairs officer at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and she's also associate editor of the International Journal of Political Economy. Elissa Braunstein is a professor and chair of economics at Colorado State University, as well as editor of the journal Feminist Economics. And Carlo is an associate professor of economics at the Sapienza University of Rome and managing editor of PSL Quarterly Review and Moneta e Credito. We really hope this conversation this session to be more a conversation than a panel. So we encourage people from the audience to ask questions in the chat box or in the Q&A sessions. And yeah, without more to say, let's get started. And let's get started with a big question, which is that young new economic thinkers expressed lack of training for writing papers during their graduate studies. Based on your experience, what are the most common mistakes and what would you recommend to do? So let's start with Tom, with you, if that's okay.
Sure. Look, it's pro forma usually to say I'm glad to be here, but as I read the newspapers around and look at the world, I can realize there's so many nastier alternatives in a COVID epidemic that I can truly tell you I'm really glad to be here there still, as it were. Now, let me just pick right up on that. I thought, I'm sorry to sound like Polonius in Shakespeare, but I would emphasize a few things. First of all, and I've been dealing with YSI folks, young scholars, old scholars, scholars of all types for a long time. First thing to be said is, as you're coming out, no matter how many million people tell you differently, don't spend a lot of time writing blogs or doing presentations. Concentrate on getting some real papers out, then do the blogs and presentations. There. Now, my next sort of Polonius-like advice, and here I could imagine an argument because you're dealing with a profession that's less than on the up and up. I was I managed the INET Citations Project, where we had all kinds of people looking into what really drives journal publication. The results were not edifying there, but I still think for young scholars tend to undervalue how important it is that their early publications be of really high quality. You get a lot of contrary advice, like just get something published, get it out there. It's like getting on the scoreboard in a soccer game. It's not a soccer game. In my judgment, it really matters, particularly your early papers, whether people can clearly see, even if they don't like it. And if they all love it, there's probably something wrong with what you're doing. But even if they don't like it, if they can see clearly that it's of high quality, you will be helped by that. Now, that means several things. The most important advice I give people, I think, all the time is, can you simply tell us what this paper is about in a single paragraph? that is punchy and to the point. If you can't, there's a problem. And if it's not in the paper, that's an even bigger problem. And so it's like, this is, if there's one single piece of advice, it's to keep getting this thing down, what your paper is about, to a single paragraph. I'm not telling you to think in paragraphs or sound bites, but it's just the fact that the beginning of all clarity, it begins at home, and getting it straightforward from the start. Then my next advice for people starting out is find something where you've got really good evidence that whatever it is, that you can make your point. I mean, that's like, you may have several things to say, some of which would be harder to prove than others. Well, try to go for, in an early paper, for stuff where there is some real evidence. Now, this doesn't just mean quantitative data or econometrics, though I'll get to that in a second. But it could be, manuscript evidence out of collections. And if you're doing policy analysis stuff or things like that, trying to prove the banker is actually trying to move to, say, maximize their profits is really neat if you can actually find letters where the bankers are saying, let's maximize our profits. I've done it, so I know perfectly well that these things exist there. Then the next step is, and here I'm going to quote not any economist, but actually Hector Berlioz. He just said, look, you can't fall behind in the level of technique, meaning go out, read the literature, and then try to pick up on the most advanced papers in the field. I'm not suggesting, I mean, this is INET, that you just parrot what people consider to be the most advanced papers in the field. Those are mostly junk, often very stylized junk, okay? But don't fall behind on the level of technique. Start by sort of posing the problem as they do, and then try to figure out how you go from what they are doing to what's sensible there. Now, in particular, for the econometrics, if you're going to use it, use the best stuff out there, which leads to my sort of next point. The whole problem in getting published is to try to fit an advanced notion of evidence, and sometimes with a theoretical statement, with institutional clarity about what you're actually talking about. Most of neoclassical economics goes down at precisely that point. The stuff is, when you translate it into institutional terms, it can't be true. And so your problem is to make that absolutely clear, and readers of your paper need to be able to see that. Now, then, if you're actually trying to write a paper, this boils down then to a sort of pretty straightforward set of things to do. One is make sure you have a clear discussion of the literature in your paper early on. This is phase one. I always still quote St. Augustine's advice to writing, which was basically boils down, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. That is many times reformulated in different cultures, but I think he actually did say it first. Anyway, if you can, you need to boil the literature down and do it in the form of a clear map. To the extent there are differences, it's nice to sort of highlight those. Then finally get around to stating what your point of view is in the sort of middle of the section. What you're going to argue has got to be clear there. And say it in the, in plain, simple English. Now, and then finally, you can write a conclusion. Now, let's talk, the thing that just drives me nuts about everybody when I have these conversations with folks is, what about strategy? And a lot of folks think this is a little bit like an attack on the Russian front during World War II. That is to say, there's a million angles you can play. Mostly what you can do is lose the whole army somewhere in a fog in this business. There's not a lot of angles you can play. My advice is, if you think you've got a good paper, just never mind what people tell you. Try a top journal and see what happens. The worst that happens is you get rejected. If it makes you feel better, I know, because I've talked to these folks, that they cite reject huge numbers of papers. No problem in that. It's not like you have to go immediately tell everybody either. I mean, there. But try one. And then failing that, then you have to sort of sit and think, who's been publishing stuff on your topic? Where would an appreciative audience be there? This is harder, I think, for Europeans than Americans, because it's perfectly obvious to me that the range of dissent in European journals may be broader as an ensemble in countrywide, that is to say, from Spain to Poland. But actually, inside each country, the range of opinions offered are often dominated by a few research institutes, even more than in the US. There is also this problem, well documented by the INET Citation Project, which is, the journals are overwhelmingly focused on Anglo-American problems and experience in those countries. Now, this leads to a real dilemma for researchers from other countries. I had a long talk with a researcher who later wrote a terrific paper on actual potential output. And I said to her, you got a problem here. If you do the Italian example, it'll be much harder to publish than if you take the US or the UK. That lady today just tells me, yes, that absolutely, that was the right advice. I'm not telling you this is wonderful. I think it's ridiculous. Like, people in, say, Austria should be able to publish in top journals on Austrian problems. But there is that huge bias, and you got to deal with it. So, I've talked like 10 minutes here or so. I will now just stop and listen to my fellow panelists with the rest of you.
Orsola, would you like to continue?
Sure, thank you. Well, Tom was very comprehensive in his initial statement, I have to say, and I can confirm that this is, as Tom has been my mentor as well when I was finishing my PhD, especially, and also later when I started out as a researcher. And he's been telling me the same thing. So he really means it. I can tell you that. And I basically, perhaps for this reason, because I've been hearing this for a long time, I basically agree with it. I can add a few things, but I think that he said a lot of things that are correct. I would add that for me, for example, when, again, also another word of caution, I'm not a teacher, but of course, I'm associate editor at the IJPE, and I've been a researcher myself. So it's perhaps a slightly different perspective that I have. But for me, it was a real game changer when I was writing my PhD thesis to try and present part of it at conferences. So yeah, it's true that sometimes it can be a waste of time, but in reality, when you do already have some material, and even if it looks a bit confused to you, it is very, very useful to try to put it in a way that's presentable, because it really makes you understand what's maybe more relevant or superfluous in the paper, especially if you don't have a lot of time to present. So actually, that for me was crucial. And I have to thank my supervisor at the time, Maria Secareccia, who pushed me at the time to present my work, even if it wasn't in a condition that was really publishable as a paper yet. But that was, it still is actually for me an important step in the process of producing a paper. Especially try to be in panels where you can get good discussants, and that's also obviously part of the process. Another thing I'd like to mention, in addition to what Tom said, is about discussion of the literature. I find that younger researchers sometimes spend too much time discussing the literature in too much detail. Sometimes give too much importance to the authors they like, as if that could give them authority while they use their concept, the concept of these authors that they like, or they just go on for too long because they think they need to show that they know certain things on a discussion of the literature. And that is a common mistake that I think it's okay in a PhD thesis. It's actually important to develop all the literature, but not necessarily for a paper. So that's something that I myself struggled with initially. I thought I had to talk about basically everything I knew of a subject before saying what I actually thought about it, and but that's not what actually. As an editor, I start getting really frustrated when I see papers like that, and I just say, try to cut this, please, and send it back. That's basically what I could add for now. I think. I would to reassure people, also maybe some people out there, that, for example, the International Journal of Political Economy, of which I'm associate editor, does publish works that do not pertain necessarily to the Anglo-Saxon world or economies. So there is space out there for those papers as well.
Thank you so much. We will continue with Elissa now.
Thank you very much for inviting me today. It's interesting to hear everyone talk, and some of the things I'll say will repeat or package some of the things that folks have said before. I wanted to start off, though, just for a minute by giving you my sort of positionality with which I approach this panel, in particular as the editor of Feminist Economics, which I've been doing since 2017, and I took over from the founding editor, Diana Strausman. The first issue was published in 1995, and it's a journal of the International Association for Feminist Economics. And in particular, it provides an open forum for dialogue and debate about feminist economic perspectives. And in the 90s, it was established at a time when feminist economists were getting denied tenure in economics departments, when they were doing work on gender. And so a key focus of this project has been to establish a peer-reviewed journal with the stature to enable feminist economists to both impact the discipline and to get tenure in economics departments. So in that sense, that's been part of our intellectual project, and we do pay attention to impact factor and things like that. We get about 300 submissions a year. This has to do, I think, with the rising popularity of gender in the mainstream of the economics profession, with about another 100 revisions. We publish about 32 articles a year, so that means our acceptance rate hovers around 10%, a little higher, but it's higher for papers that are explicitly feminist. We get a lot of submissions that just have sort of a gender variable. They're not feminist economic papers. The review process is demanding, but we are committed to mentoring early career scholars. The first paper that I submitted to Feminist Economics, which was in the late 1990s, one of the reviews was longer than the actual paper. I don't think that doesn't really happen anymore, but it was pretty overwhelming for an early career scholar. So turning quickly to some of the common mistakes, and again, that I've encountered as editor of the journal. The first is, submissions where the submitter has not carefully read, our editorial policies, which are right there on the website. And when you're fielding 300 submissions a year, you're looking for, you are, I don't want to say you're looking for a reason to reject papers, but certainly, you're more likely to dismiss papers where the author does not seem even familiar with the journal. So another common mistake is not actually reading the journal. For early career scholars, I think sending in thesis chapters, essentially thesis chapters, so as opposed to a journal paper, is something that I come across too. To echo something that Tom said, the way I think about it, journal articles are not murder mysteries. You shouldn't have to wait until the end to know what the article is going to say. So I highly recommend putting your main method, conclusion, and context in terms of country context in the abstract and the introduction. Situate your work in the related literature, especially that which has been published in the journal to which you're submitting. Identify what is your contribution to this literature. Stepping back a little bit more, I think, in speaking to a point that Tom made, get articles in the pipeline quickly. Review can take a while. Try a top journal, yes. Most have quick time to first decision turnaround times, right? So you won't be wasting that much time. But if you're wondering about it, you can ask the editor what the average time to first decision is. So that's something that you should consider also. In terms of doing work on country contexts that are outside of the Anglo-Saxon sort of context, most journals, I think these days, have an international readership. And one thing that we require of our publications is for authors to explicitly talk about why a topic is important to countries other than the one under study. So whether you're doing a country about the United States, a paper about the United States, or a paper about the UK, or a paper about Ghana or Indonesia, it helps in terms of situating your work in the literature to explain why it provides insights to folks who are not familiar with your country context, right? And to not make assumptions about the generalizability of your discussion on the one hand, but to also point out what are some specific insights that you find that are potentially applicable to other countries. And then another big common mistake that I find is on conclusions. Don't make policy conclusions that are not warranted by your study. Be specific. Don't write things like policymakers need to look at the issue more carefully. I mean, one of the things that I see a lot is, there's a study about something, and then you get to the concluding section, which is inevitably about policy, and suddenly you're greeted by a laundry list of, general policy conclusions, like there should be more gender equality, or, provisioning for childcare, when the study itself doesn't address directly those issues. So that's another thing that I would be careful about. Okay, I think I can pause there. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Carlo, would you like to comment now?
Sure, thank you, and good morning, everybody. I'm Carlo Di Poldi. I also would like to, as Elissa just did, to briefly start by situating myself. So I'm the editor of Moneta e Credito in Italian and of PSL Quarterly Review in English. This journal was actually known before as the Banca Nazionale del Lavoro Quarterly Review because it was owned by the BNL. Then the bank has decided that it was not a core business anymore, and it has donated it for free to a small association that was basically set up just for this purpose. I'm a member of the council of this association and the editor of the journal. This is important for you to know because my main suggestion to you would be that in my view, the first and most basic problem with early career researchers might find when they try to publish in journals is that they really consider journals as black boxes. They don't know a lot about journals. They have these articles and they just try to publish it almost wherever, as long as it is in a relatively well-known journal, possibly according to where you're based, also depending on some country-specific rankings or something of that kind. This is a major problem because, in fact, a journal is a community. For example, Elissa's journal, she already said, is very much linked to an association. Ours has a different story. We are, a very tiny, small association, but we still are a community. And this is true for all journals, in my view. So my first suggestion would be try to understand a little bit better of the journal you are aiming to publish in terms, for example, of the organization. If this is a very large journal, it is probable that decisions will be taken by a committee, or depending on how the journal is structured, they may have a number of associate editors who will be responsible for the single submissions. Smaller journals instead tend to have just one, or anyway very few, managing editors who are in charge of handling almost all submissions. Then, for example, another major difference is that some journals give a lot of importance to the referee's judgment. Others consider the referee's report as just mere suggestions, and the editor takes the real decision in the end. This is really important for you to understand, because it has happened for example, let me talk about my own journal. In our case, we strongly believe that it should be the editor who, puts the face on a decision. And it has happened to me often that I've been, for example, making additional suggestions, criticisms, or recommendations in a decision letter that I see often totally not addressed by the authors, who believe they only have to answer to the referees. This is really, a sign that you haven't probably understood who are you talking to. So please try remembering that when you are, well, first of all, exchanging emails, but also when you're writing a journal article, you are talking to somebody. You're not just, telling us a story. You must enter into a conversation. And the second point, not only journals are communities that are organized in different ways, and for example, this is relevant in terms of who take a decision, they may also have very different policies. So for example, something that Elissa has not probably mentioned, but feminist economics has a very clear policy in terms of how you report on statistical evidence and econometric results. We strongly support that. That's basically coming from work from Deirdre McCloskey and so on. I don't know if you are familiar with that, but we are 100% on the same page. And this is all written on our webpage. So something that really you should do before submitting to any kind of journal is please read the webpage. I mean, it's there for a reason. But also, I would take a step further and say that if you don't read the articles of a journal, chances are you may not be too interested in writing there. By this, I mean, as I said before, well, there are a few superstar people who can start by telling us a story. They maybe have a great story. Maybe they also come from a privileged background, so people will be naturally interested in what they have to say. But for us, human beings, the important thing is understanding that you are entering a conversation that was already going on. And it's very important that you clearly situate yourself. You tell us, so this person A, person B, and F said this, my paper will contribute in this way. This is what I have to say. Don't please start by, feeling this urge of telling us your story, for a simple fact. Every year on REPEC, more than 30,000 new unique papers are added. There's really a publications glut. Too much stuff being written. Nobody can really read all this stuff. This is unfortunate, and it's something that I really, truly hate. But that's how it is. So it will be extremely arrogant for somebody to start from the premise that a referee or even the editor, I'm sorry to say, will start reading your paper with all the attention of the world. Please consider that sometimes the referees have their own private lives. They may be distracted while reading. It may take them a little longer than you hoped for. Of course, as editors, it's our job to try and prevent that, but it can happen. So the general rule will be, please try to make it interesting for them. And then there's one point I wanted to say and I forgot about it. I'm sorry. So I think I will go back to that later. Sorry.
Well, thank you all so much. We already started to receive some questions, but please continue to do so. I just wanted to ask all of you something. I think you all touch upon the issue of sending to top journals or not. And we often hear that new economic thinkers struggle quite a lot to get their work published in top journals. So will you recommend them to try to publish more in maybe not well ranked journals, or try to adapt a little bit their work to try to fit it into one of the highest ranked journals? And related to that, also some of you mentioned the topic of presenting in conferences, and I was wondering if it would be a good idea to publish the work as a working paper before sending it to a journal. So open to whomever wants to start. Carlo?
Yeah, if I may. Yeah, so I totally agree with what Tom said at first when he said, please don't waste too much time, for example, writing blogs and so on. But as Orsola already mentioned, with one exception, that is to say, I too think it's important to present in conferences, to answer your question, Nicolas. Because as I said before, journals are communities, and it's really a very good starting point trying to understand who might be your referees in the future, who are the editors, getting to know people, putting a face on names. This is, again, because I do think that it's important that you do not consider journals as black boxes. Coming to your other question, Nicolas, concerning rankings. So I understand this is a very difficult topic. In some countries, for example, my own, rules and constraints on especially early career researchers are so tight that you really do not have a choice there. You just have to follow, the wave and hope for the best. Of course, it is not ideal. I can easily tell you that after we've been indexed in the major, the international databases, we even sometimes received submissions when the name of the journal is wrong. So people are just, trying in the order of the ranking and sending stuff without knowing what is our journal about. We sometimes receive submissions about psychology or business organization, things that we really do not work on. So that's really the best way to get immediately rejected. The point being, if you try to submit to somewhere, please remember that you are talking to people. But I do understand that rankings are important. So this is a conundrum on which it is difficult to have, clear-cut solutions. On this, I also agree with Tom. Something that you may want to consider is that, to the extent that it's not necessarily the top 5, but to the extent that, large, important, famous journals can provide you feedback, it's also useful to just try. Receiving a very good rejection, especially if you're an early career researcher, can teach you a lot. You can really see, because what you write in the paper might be different from what people read in the paper. So I think it's a very formative experience in my view.
Could I comment on that? Just a couple of things. Carlo is always so charitable and friendly to his colleagues. I have to tell you that the majority of rejections I've seen from people showing me are just ridiculous. I saw one recently where the editor began by saying, "That's a really interesting paper, but since it doesn't have a representative agent, well, we're not going to publish it." That's real old economic thinking. But now there is, on this business about working papers, there is actually some empirical evidence. There's I forget who has it, but it's out there and should be pretty easy to find. Might be that Munich operation, where they had sort of tried to find out in citations, which are not, I'm not telling you that citations should be your live live all and settle all questions. That's ridiculous. But if you're just trying to sort of predict citations, it turns out having been out as a working paper first is very good. And I've had a few experiences with people showing me where journal editors are telling their contributors, we don't want you to publish this as a working paper. They will always tell you that. Monopoly is frankly not a sort of Chicago school thing. It looks to me like it exists on the left as on the right, almost without regard to the political spectrum. But you should just ignore that. I mean, I saw a case recently that really miffed me where somebody was told, a young woman was told, no, you can't publish it as a working paper. She'd have been better advised to publish it as a working paper and go elsewhere on that. But there is real empirical evidence for this. If you can find a reasonable working paper series to get into, there must be some that are bad ideas, but you should probably do it.
Can I jump in here? I agree. I mean, we at Feminist Economics on the working paper question, if you can publish it as a working paper, I think that's great, and it does garner interest and more citations. In terms of the other question that had come up, and targeting highly ranked journals, it really varies by department. So, it depends on what the requirements are for tenure and promotion in your particular situation. So, for instance, we had a situation here at Colorado State where someone had been really steeped in the strategy of targeting top-ranked journals and ended up coming on the tenure decision without enough publications because they had used up a lot of time trying to publish in the top journals and then had not sort of followed up by supplementing their pipeline with lower ranked journals, not low ranked journals, but not, the top 5 kind of thing. So I think it's individual. It depends on where you are and what the conditions are for tenure and promotion, but you have to pay attention to that and use that as part of to form your strategy about where and how to publish.
Well, if I may add a few things, I agree with with everyone else on working papers. We don't have any problem publishing papers that have been published as working papers before. Also because we really trust our own revision process and referee process, which normally anyway improves or at least gives some how to say. Some sort of editorial line anyway to the paper, so it won't be published exactly. Normally, it won't be published exactly as it was when it was sent to the journal first. That doesn't mean that you'll certainly get revised and resubmit from us, But anyway, there are always normally what we strive for is that referees do give serious advice. Even if they're not substantial, doesn't mean that you have to rewrite everything, but they do give some advice, especially to situate better the paper inside the editorial line of the journal. And that's very important. That's a little bit what Carlo was saying when it means, journals are not black boxes. So if I can interpret that also in terms of the fact that there is an editorial line, and by that, it means that we are trying to create some order in the knowledge that's being produced, some order that reflects a vision. And if you say it like that, it looks like something very complex and hard to understand. What do I do? Do I look at all the issues? I go to the website and just read all the papers that have been published. And that's why maybe going to conferences can help a little bit by talking to people, but just browsing panels to understand who these people are, what their work is, in a relatable way. So I think it's true. Maybe the fact that now there are online conferences can be a good thing for those who maybe don't have funding to travel to conferences abroad. So that's probably, I think, an improvement for many students all over the world who cannot maybe fly to the US, to the Eastern Economic Conference, or to Berlin, and so on. So I would encourage to do a little bit of that, as I said also before. On whether you should strive to publish as quickly as possible, my own experience, which reflects Tom's advice, I have to say, on this, has been the opposite. That I really think one, especially at the beginning of the career, should publish something that really reflects their capacity and their vision, because you're trying to make a mark. And maybe, later, even if you publish something that's not perfectly refined, you already have a reputation. So you can afford to be a bit sloppier sometimes, if, there might be reasons to do that. But at the beginning, I think one has to be very, very careful. So fine for working papers, but doesn't have to mean that, you just publish whatever you have there because you want something and your name on a paper. Have to be careful at the beginning with working papers for this reason. Try to find working paper series that have editors as well, who can look at the paper and advise you. And as an editor, one thing I would like to say is that I find that I have the impression, not just that people send papers without knowing what the journal is about, something which Mario Seccareccia, the editor of the HAPE, is really, really upset about every time. But also, don't just send it because you think that anyway a revision or even a rejection will make you learn something, and so you can improve it, or as a way, to improve the paper by getting some advice. There's a real problem of too many papers of low quality being sent, and limited time of referees, who, especially those who, we ask to be thorough, because that's the reputation of the journal. And so it's really unfair to everyone involved in this process, which we do, for free, essentially, because it's all volunteer work. It's not a full-time job being an editor of a journal, and certainly it's not a full-time job, or nor a paid job to be a referee. It's really unfair to all these people involved in the process to just send whatever you have, just because, I think there should be, more. One should be more careful. Essentially, that's the thing. And but I see one question here by Chloe. I don't know if I can answer that now.
Yeah, please go ahead.
She asks that journals. She's heard that journals usually prefer not to publish too many papers on the same small topic. In this case, should I send my papers to a journal that's published some of the papers I am citing in my own? So I think definitely yes. For example, we published we also really like publishing special issues on specific topics. We find that attracts attention and really gets the give us as editors or guest editors, if there are guest editors, the ability to create a larger, a clearer vision of their of a certain topic, of how they read a certain topic, understand, and want to study it. So absolutely, I think it's very useful to use that as a criterion for deciding where to send your paper. And I don't know who said that journals don't like to publish too many papers on the same small topic. I mean, there can be cases where sometimes we publish a paper that's a bit off topic and it's an exception. But normally, if we publish the paper, it means it's part of our vision. So I would definitely do that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Hey, maybe we should address that question about co-authorship, because that question is a perennial. It just doesn't go away. I'll just tell you my view about it, which is, first of all, there's a whole bunch of types of papers where you really need co-authors, or they're not going to be written, where they can't possibly, there is some specialization, or I hesitate to say this, gains from trade, or as the Passanetti folks would say, choice of technique, instead of that. But you're going to need co-authors for that, and there is this problem. There is some empirical evidence that women get downvalued on co-authorships. On the other hand, the evidence is they get downvalued on a whole bunch of things, even if they're sole authors. Indeed, the Heckman paper that at INET published on top journals showed very plainly that while everybody, if they came out in a top journal, was doing very well, was getting a lot for it, the men were doing better than the women on average. I have other problems with certain econometric results of that. I had the dispute at the time with Jim. But I think it's a bad idea to do an enormous number of co-authorships as an untenured scholar. You can be almost certain that somebody will try to nail you on that if they don't like you. I mean, if you have a reasonable being, but who has those? Where is this to be found in what, actually existing universities? So my suggestion is, don't be afraid of co-authorships, but don't massively indulge them. At least till you're tenured.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I could follow up on that. I agree with Tom on that. We've had, in tenure and promotion decisions, that very issue come up. You have to demonstrate that you can actually do economics research and write economics journal articles, and if your entire basis is co-authored, people have grounds to come after you, as Tom put it. I also wanted to reiterate the point that I made in relationship to Orsola's comments about the speed of publication. I think it really depends, again, on what kind of job you have and what the conditions are for tenure and promotion. At Colorado State, you have essentially 5 years to publish 7 articles. And there's both a quantitative and a qualitative expectation. So you need to really get moving quickly, but that is different for different kinds of jobs and in different parts of the world. So I think it's contextual.
Yeah, could I offer a friendly amendment to that? Because Elissa reminds me that this is actually important. There are a fair number of jobs now in many countries that are of short duration, and to get renewed, you need to publish almost anything. I mean, in many cases, I'm sorry to say, the promotion requirements are, okay, if there's something out there, they'll renew you till you come up for tenure. And they should tell you this, but you better watch out, because a lot of places use that rule. They're just not going to invest a lot of time in analyzing anything. And so you need to be sure that, you get if you'll forgive the sports metaphor. I mean, this may date me back to the Richard Nixon era, but, you got to get on the scoreboard in the first half if you want to play the second half. I'm sorry, but there we are.
So we have a series of questions related to data. One asks, they were published. So do we also have to submit our data and coding for empirical papers, or that is varied by journal? Following up on that, someone asks if it's better to, Kurt asked if it's better to use data, because that's what most journals use. Sensi again asks, are journals looking for thorough explanations of technique used, or rather how well you can use the technique to show your results?
Now, look, I mean, on Stata, yeah, a lot of folks in the US and the UK use Stata. My sense is R is used widely in Europe. This has more to do with trying to avoid monopolistic rents in your university system than anything else. And I can't imagine that anybody rejects papers based on, I've never seen it. There may be one case somewhere. There's no atrocity that you will not find somewhere in economics, but I've never seen that one or heard of it.
But if I may, on the second point, Nicolas, when you said if people should explain their technique in great detail, well, first of all, again, this is something that you should read on the journal's webpage. It's there. Please go there. Journals are different. So my general problem with this sort of questions is that which journal are you asking? But then more or less considering the three journals represented here, well, okay, no, let me talk about our specific experience. It happens to me, especially from authors for certain countries, on which maybe we can go later, and from early career researchers. They feel this urge to explain you again, what is OLS regression and so on. Please don't do that. I mean, going back to my original point, you are talking with somebody. You are not just telling us a story. And please try to understand who is this somebody? In particular, our readers are relatively, versed with econometrics and statistics. So they don't really need you to explain things that should be already be known. Anyway, whenever in doubt, this is something that I wanted to say before. I'm sorry, I'm not feeling too well today, so that's why I forgot at the beginning. This might change by editors, true, but in our case, by all means, whenever you have a doubt, just write me an email. Ask the editors before submitting something that is totally wrong. Ask me, what do you think if I should do this or this? In our case, much happy to answer. And just for you to know, the very senior people do that a lot. Actually, it happens all the time that they send you a manuscript saying, what do you think about this manuscript? So that's not really a submission, but then you could easily tell, oh, this is great, why don't you just send it to the journal? This sort of more informal interaction is, of course, something that you can only have with people that you already know. But again, please try to remember that journals are communities, and your aim should be to join a community, not just, to score points. Then, of course, Tom's point about, having to get and retain a job is crucial. I totally agree with that. But I would also argue, on the other hand, that in the world there are very many jobs that are often paid a lot better than university jobs. So, I mean, don't totally prostitute yourself just, because you want to score points. So I know that this is also Tom's views. I'm saying I agree with what he said, but I also would like to add this caveat.
Can I follow on that? And it reemphasizes a point that a number of us have made already. But in terms of empirical presentation, once again, I can't say it often enough, read the journal, get a sense of what norms and standards are like, especially for articles that overlap with yours in terms of methodology or topic, right? It's pretty straightforward to see how, an empirical article is presented in a journal like that. And so for a journal like Feminist Economics, for instance, as Carlo referred to, we have this statistical reporting policy, which really emphasizes economic importance. And it's very important for us to not only refer to statistical significance, but how important are the conclusions are in terms of economic impact. And so again, read the journal and see what the articles look like. I think that's the best place to go for information. In terms of emailing the editor, I think that that's good advice with the following caveat. I don't think I could, because our submissions are so many, I can't field a lot of informal emails. So be careful about that. Anyway, you can always ask.
Great, thank you. We have only 5 more minutes, and there are 2 questions, so I will pose the 2 of them, and let's see how far we can go. Survey asks if you could share if there are or what might be some specific practices that are followed by to encourage higher participation of those from the Global South or those from marginalized communities. And finally, Chloe asks, I'm a bit anxious about this idea of having a pipeline of papers because I happen to be a perfectionist. How many papers are we talking about in the pipeline, and how many papers should one send to journals a year, for example? Carlo.
So this is something that Tom, the first question I'm referring to, it's something that Tom has already highlighted. The higher ranked journals tend to publish papers that are mostly about the American economy, sometimes about the UK, a little bit more rarely about the EU, and that's it. It's a huge problem. It's something that we also have discussed for INET and within the INET citation project that you had mentioned. And there are not easy solutions to that. Our journals have created a special section called Perspectives to try and highlight contributions about and from less represented countries and economies. It's also true we have been hesitant to do that, so let me say it openly. We have been hesitant because there is always this risk of assuming that the contributions from there are lower quality, and that's why you need to create special quotas. That's absolutely not our aim, so please do not misunderstand us there. But it is true, on the other hand, that statistically we do reject a whole lot of submissions from, for example, in our case, Central and South Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa. This happens a lot for very specific problems. That is to say, usually from there we get mere econometric exercises that really do not fit with our journal's aims and scope. So my main suggestion again would be, please read, as Elissa said, the sort of things that we publish. Try to understand if this is a good fit. And we are working on that. So we are also very happy to receive more suggestions about how to, solve this underrepresentation problem.
So if I may speak about the IJP, the history of the IJP is very much international in scope, in the sense that the editor, Mario Seccareccia, when he took on the journal in the mid-90s, you surely know, he's a Canadian economist who is Francophone but with Italian roots, and his very own approach to research is very pluralist, and he's close ties. Through his research, he's had close ties, for instance, with Latin America, with France, with Italy, and not only and India. And his journal, which since 2016 I have been a part of, reflects that very much. So what we do is we signal the fact that we are interested in certain topics which are also institutional, connected to the history of thought, connected to the economics of areas of the world which are not just the United States. Through the papers we published, sometimes we find some lacks, some topics that are missing, that we find we don't have enough papers about. So we sort of ask actively some researchers to do that. We do that through special issues. So what we're trying to do is really convey through our papers the type of research that we are willing to publish, and that hopefully very much reflects the fact that we are interested. We have a very global scope in our editorial vision. And this has so far worked for many countries, although it's true that not for entire world, and we have very few publication coming, for example, from Africa.
I know we're getting to the end. Can I just follow up on that last point in terms of promoting submissions and publications from the Global South? It's part of, in terms of feminist economics, it's part of our core mission to promote such submissions and publications. A few of the ways that we do that is we have, Carlo referred to how different journals have different sort of editorial processes. I'm the sort of editor-in-chief, but we have a team of 34 associate editors who organize the peer review process. And in terms of that, we have, we ensure representation from all over the world. We're an internationally oriented journal, whether folks are currently located in the Global South or come from the Global South originally. We also have an internal style editing process. So that's something that we're able to offer for folks where English is not their first language. We are capable of doing a line-by-line edit. We don't do it for everyone, but it's specifically so that we can facilitate publication from all over the world and not just for native English speakers. And then, of course, we have this policy on international orientation that all papers have to talk about or address their relevance to our international readership. And another thing that we do is we keep track of authors and where they come from in terms of diversity. And so I was just looking back in 2020, for instance, 46% of our authors for the 2020 volume year were either currently located in the Global South or from the Global South and currently located in the Global North. So we also do that disaggregation in terms of gender, race, and ethnicity within the Global North, but that's part of our editorial policy.
But could two very quick comments? I know we're pretty much out of time. One is on yes, English. An awful lot of improvement could be in papers if you simply got rid of the passive voice. I mean, just take it and rewrite it as an active verb. And once you will be astonished at how much better the paper will flow, and that folks, particularly statisticians, seem incredibly prone to the passive voice. If you rewrite the stuff in simple, straightforward, active verb English, you will be amazed. My other point is nobody said anything about books, and that's probably something we better mention for 1 second. Put simply, if you look at the Heckman paper on citations, so the INET paper that is around, he sort of shows you that books have had a bigger influence in economics even recently than people like to admit. But that everybody on this panel's comments, Elissa, Carlo in particular, about you got to watch with the people you're actually having to get promoted by, their standards. But not the worst strategy on earth if you're dealing with topics that allow this. Not every topic makes sense for this, is to take 3 or 4 articles on the same theme and turn them into a little book. You can do that, and it makes it harder to ignore, and it does definitely widen the audience. The whole book trade is now in a sort of crisis because it's clear that publishers are just widely launching their, excuse me here 1 second. Our publishers are now lengthening the minimum press run they want, and that's going to make it harder to publish, but it's a strategy that still works, and there's a lot to be said for it.
Well, thank you so much. to all of you. This has been truly insightful, and I'm really happy that we managed to put this panel together and start this conversation. This ends not only this session, but the whole early career days. And again, we are super happy that we actually started this conversation. I want to thank everyone who's been in the organization of this event, which has been truly a success. And I also want to thank all of you that participated there and posed your very interesting questions throughout the sessions. All of the sessions will be posted on YouTube later on. So if you want to take a look at that or share, for example, this session, because you think it will help others, you can do so. And last but not least, this has been the first ever Early Career Days, but it will not be the last. You can save the date because the next one will happen on March. And if you have any ideas or want to get involved in the organization, please let us know, and we will consider them. So thank you so much, everyone, and see you soon.